The most popular book in the history of chess, I could say, and best known book is the My System by Nimzowitsch. My System by Nimzowitsch was written about 75 years ago, and those principles of positional play we're still adapting now. We're still adapting, we still respect, because this is based on very strong research, and it's based on good understanding of position, and well, it proved itself as very reliable way of playing chess. However, it was 75 years ago. We still use these principles, but we made some adjustments. I normally, not me, just any reasonably strong chess player uses those principles. But what they do, they also, they modifying it. And I'm going to show you, since Nimzowitsch, how this modifying works and why we have different criteria where we don't have different criteria, we just are more flexible. We're using his ideas in a more improved version. And these DVDs will will take you throughout all this evolution of Nimzowitsch's ideas. So get comfortable and learn some most important aspects of positional and tactical play. Here is interesting position from the game Nimzowitsch with white and a famous player in the beginning of the century, Vidmar. In this position, Nimzowitsch played rook b1, black played rook to e8, which is a very strong move. Because of back rank weakness, white cannot capture the queen because black is going to checkmate them. So, and black got the counterplay and game went on. After the game, Nimzowitsch showed, after analysis, that rook e4 would have won. I agree with him 100%, and the variation he shows, after rook e4, if black plays bishop c6, then knight f6 check, g takes f, and king h8, rook h4 wins the game. You see the threat of mate on h7, rook takes h7, and if black captures the knight, white has several different ways to win. Queen takes f6 is probably the easiest, followed by rook g4. That's an easy win. So after knight f6 check, black has to capture. Since king f8 is also weak, knight takes h7, king g8, knight f6 check, and black has a lot of problems. And after g takes f, Nimzowitsch does say that rook g4 wins. And after king f8, queen takes f6 with a winning attack. Now, I don't dispute that. I agree with it 100%. But here is the point, very important point I want to make. That's actually, I don't really like the way Nimzowitsch just shows the variation and shows the winning move. In order to learn, you have to realize in today's chess we have criteria and certain principles that help us find the winning move. Well, here are the criteria. If you notice, all black's pieces are located on a queen side. Black's king side does not have any support from the pieces. White plays very powerful knight on h5, and white has queen on f3 and open e-file. That signals you that you must try to attack black's king. Also, the other thing that we know now, it might not have been known at that time when game was played. It was played in 1911. That combination queen and the knight in attack is most of the time it's a deadly combination. So white has wide range of strong continuations. Once you know that you have to attack on the king side, then you get all kinds of ideas. Rook e4, g4, rook d4, g4, maybe queen g3, attacking checkmate, and then try to get some threats on the king side. Queen g5 is not good, probably because queen c3. But that's the direction you're looking at. You need the direction on g6, maybe knight f6 check, followed by either rook e7 or queen h4. That will be a good start. Anyway, you should look at that direction. Nimzowitsch doesn't say, he says that rook b1 is a wrong move because of rook e8. I agree with him, and at the same time I disagree with him. Rook b1 is definitely wrong move, but it's wrong not only because black has rook e8 move. It's just in general, it's a wrong approach and a bad move. You don't need to go to a queen side. You don't need any presence and any contact on queen side. You must concentrate on a king side attack, especially when you are a pawn down and you have big presence of your pieces on king side. So now you know the target is the king side. We have to attack and we have to do it quick. Now, how does rook e4? Nimzowitsch found this move, and he talks about this move much later after the game. But here is the simple way why in today's world relatively strong player can find rook e4 move quickly. Okay, if you don't see immediate mate with a queen and a knight, you see you can't win right away. That means, that signals you that you must bring more pieces. Now, in order to bring, obviously more pieces is not going to be a king or a pawn, so we have to bring the rook. Now, there are two rooks we have. We may be able to go rook e7. Actually, it's one of possible and very strong moves also. We're going to go rook e7 and maybe rook e4, g4, maybe rook d4, g4. If I was playing, I would move rook d4 and g4 because that weakens my back rank, the first rank. So, for example, on rook d4, rook e8, now we are distracted from direct attack by black threatening to checkmate us on a back rank. So rook e4 would make more sense because when we bring rook to g4, our back rank is protected with the d1 rook. So we have now various different opportunities, but the target, the idea does not change. We must attack on a king side. That's for sure. So rook e7 would be interesting move. Attacking f7 pawn and a bishop c4, then you see queen g4 is interesting move. Also threatening queen takes g7, queen takes c4, but then black plays queen takes c3, protects the mate and protects the bishop. So how do you find the correct move in chess? Correct move is found today using various different criteria. One, you see the location of your pieces and you know what your plan is. That's number one. Number two, you have to calculate variations and you have to look at various different possibilities, and I strongly recommend to um, try to make the best move, calculate the best moves from your opponent. That's what you have to do. So once you calculate rook e4, you calculate rook e7. Now you see, we narrowed down to 2 or 3 moves, probably 2. Rook e4 is a lot easier move to find than it may appear to you. So rook e4 wins, definitely wins. I agree with Nimzowitsch, but at that time in 1911 it wasn't really known that queen and the knight combination is very, very powerful and can be very deadly. For example, if you look even in the end game, when you have queen and knight, your opponent has queen and bishop. It's a lot of times the queen and knight, actually most of the time queen and knight is better because they are functioning together better. Because queen, if you think about it, there is a reason for it. Knight, queen, bishop functions, bishop goes diagonally, but so is queen. So they are kind of doing the same, they're playing the same role in a way. But queen and knight goes the way that queen doesn't go, so the combination works a lot better. So that's why queen and knight, it's a strong combination of pieces, and now you don't have immediate mate, you need another piece. That's how you get to rook e4 move, and that's why this is so strong. So that's interesting example, and I just showed you the way you find the best move. Of course, Nimzowitsch was right mentioning that rook e4 was winning, but if you know the principles that we know, he was strong enough player not to even think about rook b1. For example, move like rook b1 would never cross my mind, even if it was a good move, because it's counterintuitive and it's wrong, and the position does not require to play rook to b1. There is another example of interesting position about the blockade. Nimzowitsch, as usually, correctly mentions that white has an advantage here, and white does have an advantage. So he analyzes move bishop d4. Obviously we need the blockade black's e6 and d5 pawn. He says bishop d4 will be met by queen c7 if white played bishop d4, and then after queen e2 black would play knight g4, preventing white from going knight e5 and also attacking h2 pawn. And if white goes h3, black will go e5. This is 100% correct, and black does have a good game here. But only one thing I disagree with him, that one thing that Nimzowitsch doesn't write about this position. So he correctly points that blockade is essential, and I agree with him, but why would I play bishop d4? Now, in order to maintain the blockade is already there. I don't want to keep dark squared bishops on the board. Why would I go bishop d4 to try later to put knight on e5 when I can go queen e2 right away? And this is the correct move, queen e2 in this position. And Nimzowitsch mentions the queen e2 move, and this move does give white advantage. But what I don't like is why to mention bishop d4. Bishop d4 is wrong move because after queen c7 we losing grip. Even if it's temporarily, we're losing grip on the blockade. Blockade is already there. If I had this position, for example, here I would go bishop e5, but no way I would go from e5 to d4. I want to exchange dark square bishops, and have black have bad light square bishop, and later I want to mount my knight on e5. The way explanation goes, for those of you who are interested and who want to learn essence of the positional play, bishop d4, good player would never seriously consider. Queen e2 is clearly the best move, and then Nimzowitsch mentions after rook a to c8, now he wants to go bishop d4, and after queen c7, knight e5. Okay, I may agree with this just a little bit, even though it's against my main principles here. Well, yeah, because this guarantees us the blockade. But again, we don't have to do that. We can simply play rook a1 to c1. I want to take on d6 later and go knight to e5. That's my goal, and that's what I want to do. So we don't have to do bishop d4. You see, in this particular position, bishop d4 is not a bad move. But once you want to learn tools for positional play, remember, in this position it's okay to play bishop d4, but most of the time, once you have this blockade piece, do not remove from there unless you securely blockading this square, and you know 100% pawn cannot be moved. Now, if you try it yourself, it may be little different position. So very sophisticated player may play bishop d4 and knight e5. There is a very interesting example from Nimzowicz's game against Van Millet. Here is what Nimzowitsch said about this position, where Nimzowitsch was black in this position, and he said that white's upcoming attack after queen g3, h4 and g5 may be very dangerous, and I agree with him. And he shows how he neutralized beautifully white's attack and created very strong counterplay, and actually went on to winning the game. Well, he played knight h7, and after knight f3 he played queen to e7, preventing g5 and also possibly attacking a3 pawn. Queen g3, e5 pawn has to be protected, rook f e8. And now white played h4, f6, a3 pawn is hanging, white played rook a1, and after queen b7, rook f2 e1, e4 have to be protected, king f7, rook e2 and rook h8. White has great difficulties playing g5 because that will open the h file for black, and black's king just out of the danger. So this is all true, and black got good position and ended up winning the game. Well, it was well played by black, but here when you see modern good chess player playing this position with white, and black played knight h7, you have to notice here that sense of timing we have to feel here that if black plays f6 and queen e7, white's kingside attack is not going to be decisive. So white has to do something. White has to try something different, and time is very important. So once black plays queen e7, it's going to be difficult. And here is the move I am suggesting that was never even mentioned by Nimzowitsch. Move is f6. Now this move is very sharp move and practically forces black to play knight takes f6, and here is why. What are the other options? Of course, g pawn cannot move because white is going to take on h6 and win the game. Knight g5 can be met simply by queen h4 and upcoming rook f5, and black cannot hold white from storming their king. So knight takes f6. Well, remember that white played f6 just the move before black closed the position. Now I suggest rook takes f6, g takes f, and queen takes h6. Now, why I recommend to play like this and why I think white stands well. Let me explain something here. First of all, black cannot play queen takes g4 because white simply plays king h1 and wins the game because there is no defense to rook g1. But now let's look at the position, at this position. Now white does not have a mating attack here, but you have to notice black has two bishops and position is absolutely closed for bishops. White also has two bishops, but this bishop may come and participate in the attack, and knight is most importantly can go to f3, h4, and f5. Let's see how may game develop here. Suppose black plays rook to e8. We absolutely not gonna take this f6 pawn because black may go rook to e6 followed by rook to g6 and black is active. We played this sacrifice, we sacrificed the material here to have very strong attack and to build slowly, not to get the pawn back. So we could go here knight to f3. Now this is one option we have, and the other option we have just to simply play queen to h5, protecting our g4 pawn, and also we know that black wants to play bishop f8, so we may have to retreat the queen anyway, or we can play king h1. I don't think it's very important which move we make, but let's look at queen h1. If black goes bishop f8, we go knight f3, and on bishop g7, knight h4. I think this position is extremely dangerous for black because white puts the knight on f5, and now bishop is going to come into play, and you see after king h1 and g5, attack is going to be unbearable. So we have to be careful with the way we do that, because here, for example, queen takes f5 and you see the e4 pawn is pinned. So maybe instead of going king h1, we should have gone king f2. But let's go back to this critical position. Here is the critical position Nimzowitsch gives, and he suggests here knight h7 as a good way for getting great counterplay for black and also stopping white attack. And again, f6, it's extremely powerful move. Knight takes f6. Now why should I tell you why did I find f6 move and Nimzowitsch didn't? The reason why, because remember, it happened 75 years ago when he played this game, and now it's a lot more known about attacks, about timing, and I've seen thousands of games where there is some attacks are very time sensitive. For example, it rings the bell here that I cannot let black to play f6, so I look at f6. Now it may or may not work, but I'm sure that Nimzowitsch did not even consider f6. So the difference here, if he considered f6 and carefully analyzed, I'm sure he would have come to the same conclusion. The difference is not about wrong evaluation by Nimzowitsch, but the difference is he does not see a mate after this. He wouldn't even consider. But it's important to point, we cannot let black play f6. So after f6, knight takes f6, rook takes f6, pawn takes f6, queen takes h6, and a little bit of calculation is very important. We have to see that queen takes g4 loses after king h1 and rook g1. There is no defense to rook g1. And we have to also and then we know that we have to foresee the upcoming maneuver with the knight to h5. So if we go queen h5, then knight f3, h4, and f5 with the bishop on c1. Position on queen side is closed, and I think position is actually, we made too many moves for white, of course, but position is real bad for black. Now this is very, very good example of modern approach to the position. Now Nimzowitsch looked at this position schematically. He pointed knight h7. He envisioned that he's going to play f6, queen e7, and that will slow down significantly white's attack, and black can regroup and create counterplay. That's exactly what happened. But fact of, we have developed today a lot more sophisticated weapons in attacking opponent's position. So this is one of them that was not as well known then. And now this is kind of all different. We have more weapons in our arsenal of the tactical play, and this is like a long-term sacrifice which could have given white extremely powerful attack. Pawn takes f6, queen takes h6. Let's take a look once more. What else can black possibly do? Suppose they try f5, and after g takes f6 to try to play queen g7 or possibly escape with a king. Well, that's also not going to be very simple, because first of all we can go king h1, and after forced move king f7 we can go rook to g1, and after king e8 rook to g7. We have clearly we have initiative, maybe even rook to g6. Well, this is the whether it's good or not. Now, when you play position, there is no guarantee that you will try similar maneuver and it's gonna work. Whether it works or not, it's a secondary question. But it's important that when black plays knight h7, we have to consider f6 move. Even if I am wrong, I am right. Which means if I'm wrong about f6 move, I'm right about considering it. If you consider it, you will definitely be on the right track. Well, again, knight takes f6, rook takes f6, pawn takes f6. Again, this is the variation that's not even mentioned in the book. Queen takes h6, and let's look again at the f5 move. First of all, on f5 I did play g takes f, but if I give check, to begin with, I already have a perpetual check if I wanted to, but I don't think I do. Well, queen h5 here, and I don't think I want the perpetual check, and I want to go on and try to win the game by taking this way, or maybe even with an e pawn trying to play f6 and open the bishop, white's light square bishop. This is definitely risk-free for white because they have already perpetual check. This is risk-free and very, very dangerous for black. So this is very interesting example. Here is one very interesting example that Nimzowitsch gives in his books. It's a game, actually with knight on e2, game played by Tartakover, very strong player. And it explains that white has two bishops advantage and black has two bishops advantage and white has some weaknesses on the dark squares. That's absolutely correct. What happened here, white's position is well consolidated and weaknesses on dark squares, c3 and d4, he says, are very important. I agree with him, and what he shows here how black converted this position into a win. So let's follow the text in the game. King g1, king g7, king f1, then bishop to c6 played by black, knight to g1, transposing knight to f3, g5, knight to f3, h5. In this position, white chose to play bishop to e2, rook to e4, bishop to d3, and rook to f4. Now you see black has a threat of g4, king e2, g4, h takes g, h takes g, and white played knight h2, black played g3, and after knight f3, black played d4. Now black totally dominates position, and I think objectively white is lost here. Rook f1, b4, knight d2, rook to h4. You see the clear weakness, the g2 pawn. Knight f3, rook to h8, and now knight can never move because g2 weakness is very critical. King d2, and what happened then? Black played the rook h2. Actually, very well played game by black. After rook h2, knight takes h2, pawn takes h2, rook to h1, bishop e5, and after bishop f1, bishop e4, it's totally stalemated position for white. And after king d1, king f6, king d2, king g5, king d1, king g4, white resigned. Everything is very clear, very clean cut, and very well played game by the black. But let's see what Nimzowitsch here does not mention is that white did not play well. Actually, what happened in this position, that white played first move king g1. I find it wrong move. Well, king coming to f1 square and closer to the center. We know it's always very important in the endgame to do that. But right now, black has more serious problem. They have to do something with their pieces. The correct move was knight g1, and I don't think white is in danger of losing this game. In the game, knight g1 was played, but 3 moves later, But knight g1, g5, and knight f3 would have been sufficient for a draw, because if now black goes h5, then white has a couple of different opportunities. Actually, that's what played g5 and h5 in the game we just looked, but after white played king g1 and king f1. Now we have bishop g6 move, attacking rook and the pawn, and I don't think black has anything better than to make a draw. On rook e2, we can go bishop to simply bishop to d3, or even bishop takes h5 is okay for white, because after rook takes c2, knight to d4, and I don't think white can ever lose this position. So the correct move was again, the correct move was knight g1, and after g5, knight f3, king g7 if black plays, then rook e1. White has to exchange rooks. Well, there are two basic principles. Why should we choose to change rooks? Number one, rooks rook always works very, very well with bishops. And here, black has two bishops advantage. Actually, bishop was even on d7 all this time. So white plays rook e1. White wants to exchange bishops, rooks, because rook is with the support of two black's bishops is very strong. If black plays rook a8 here, now white can go knight to e5, attacking the bishop on d7, discomforting black. If black goes rook e8, that just repeats the position, so practically black will have to take the rook, and then white bringing king into center will give them a very good chances to a draw. Knight f3, and after bishop e3, probably even g4, and I don't think white can lose this position, bringing king to g2, f1, and e2. So the game, Nimzowitsch is correct 100% that black has advantage, and black played very nicely and end up winning the game. What was not mentioned is that white played poorly. By playing knight g1, white can simply neutralize black's advantage. But the reason white lost this game, because they didn't realize that they had to do that. They didn't realize that their position can slightly get worse and worse. And that's exactly what happened, and that's exactly why white lost this game. And again, here, experienced player would see that he may have long-term problems. So long-term problems have to be eliminated right away now by playing knight g1, then knight f3, rook e1, and then bring the king. So that's why we have to play knight g1. Suppose black plays king g7, knight f3. Well, how can black strengthen their position? Suppose black plays rook e3. Then we go rook e1. If black plays something like bishop c6, that's similar move was played in a game with the king on f1, but now rook e1. Now let's compare this plan to what happened in the game. I go once more to the game. King g1, king g7, king f1, bishop c6, and now knight g1, g5, and knight f3, h5. Okay, in this position, white still must play rook e1. He had to play rook e1, but he missed that opportunity too, because position is not as bad without rooks as it is with rooks. So white missed completely the plan how to defend this position. They didn't realize, and well, that's why they got slowly completely suffocated after knight f3 h5. So what do I played here? Bishop e2. Absolutely wrong idea. White's rook on d1, no match for black's e8 rook. And now rook e4, bishop d3, rook f4. That's the first sign. Now black's threatening g4 and white's king e2 g4, and you see that black's rook is a lot more active. Hg hg, and after knight h2 g3 and knight f3, and well, that's, and we saw the rest. Then black played d4, and now both bishops are very active. Rook is very active, and I think here white is totally lost. Actually, good example on how to play worse positions that do not, it doesn't look like white's in immediate danger, but once you realize you are in danger, it's too late. White is in danger now, but I think it is too late because of weakness on g2, because overwhelming activity of black's pieces, their bishops and the rook, and that's why white is almost lost. Here is a very interesting approach to one strategical issue Nimzowitsch shows in his game against Rubinstein. Nimzowitsch is playing white, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, d5, c takes d, knight takes d5, e4. Actually, this variation is still being played today. Knight b4. We are not gonna really get deep into the theoretical part of this particular example. Well, one of the main moves is bishop b5 check. Nimzowitsch played bishop c4, and Rubinstein played e6, and white castled. Okay, in the game here, Rubinstein played knight c6, d3, knight to d4, knight takes d4, c takes d, and after knight e2 and knight to c6, white played f4 and got very, very comfortable position with a solid advantage. They have very good mobile center with e4 and f4 pawns. They can push later f5 or maybe even e5 followed by knight g3, knight e4. White clearly has an advantage. There is no argument here. But what caught my attention is a very interesting point made by Nimzowitsch. He said if black played a6 here, then Nimzowitsch said he wouldn't have played d4 because after c takes d and queen takes d4, that's what he says, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop c5, and he gives for white bishop e3 and says that after bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight c2, it's not much of an advantage for white. Knight takes d4 and rook takes d4. I agree on this too. But here the way we think in today's chess. Let me show you the point where I do not agree with Nimzowitsch. After a6, if white plays d4 and black takes cd, you have to notice that white is way ahead in development. When you are way ahead in development, I don't think you should try to exchange queens. I don't like queen takes d4 move. The correct move is knight takes d4 to keep the queens on the board. And if white plays bishop c5, then we may try bishop to e3. There is no reason for exchanging queens. This position is comfortably better for white. Or even after knight b3. Now queen's going to be exchanged anyway, but this is a little bit different now. Black's c5 bishop is hanging, and if bishop retreats, black has significant development advantage, and white has significant development advantage, and they have clearly better position, much better position than white would have gotten after playing in this position, queen takes d4 instead of knight takes d4. So we today, every move that you make in chess has to be based on one of two components, either evaluation and logic or strict calculation. Calculation is not taking place in this position because there is hardly anything to calculate in this position. That's why after CD, when we have big development advantage, we definitely don't want to exchange queens. If we have to exchange queens, we can do it the way that we can gain tempo and increase our development advantage. So what Nimzowitsch said further, that he would not have played d4, but if black played a6, then he would have played d3. And after black, after d3, what he mentions in this position, that and if black played knight to c6, maybe bishop e3 followed by d4. But first of all, this knight has to go to c6, and if white plays bishop e3, bishop e7, and he will go d4, and after cd, knight takes d4, as he mentions, this is hardly any different from what I was saying. So knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, then castle followed by knight c6. Now the question I have here is, why should white in this position go d3 and move later, or 2 moves later, go d4? This is little off with the logic, so that's why I like better d4 move. And today's approach, today's understanding, my understanding of today's chess is that we should go d4 here and not d3. You don't want to, after d3, knight c6. Now white has to do something immediately, actually with bishop on f8. On bishop e3, black may even could have tried e5 if not for knight g5. So black would go bishop e7, and after d4 would have happened approximately what I recommended. Or another option for black here is to go knight to d4. And now you see, in order to take on d4, you have to do it with a bishop. You cannot take with a knight because black pawn forks 2 minor pieces. So then you have to take with the bishop, and after cd, knight e2, and knight c6, this position is not nearly as good for white as it was previous position with the same pawn structure, where white had bishop on c1 and they didn't have knight on f3, and they could have gone f4. Now there is knight on f3 that we have to lose more time retreating the knight to go f4, and bishop on c1 would have been a better piece anyway than knight on f3. So it does not click. The logic is a little off here. Again, so basic ideas Nimzowitsch recommends in these types of position is 100% right, basic ideas. But what I don't like is when he said he doesn't want to go d4, and after cd he only analyzes queen takes d4 when knight takes d4. In my opinion, clearly better move. So similar positions we can see when, well, even if we take some different openings, frequently you have this weak pawn. For example, in today's chess, when you play Sicilian defense, and for example, knight c6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight db5. Now, this is a very famous Sveshnikov variation. Approximately the same pawn structure. There is a backward pawn, but here black never has a chance to go d5, so they may go d6, and white has to explore the d5 square by playing bishop g5, and after a6 they can go either knight a3 or bishop takes f6, g takes f. But this is farther is a subject for further analysis. But what I was trying to say, in the Nimzowicz's time, this position would be simply regarded as a weak pawn and a weak square. Now, this position is a subject for very long and extensive discussion. And in this position, after bishop g5, or maybe even knight d5, it's all kind of... So we developed this kinds of position that were based only on a basic assessment. We developed it. We put a lot of forced variations. Now you can see some top players in the world like Kramnik and like Aleko. They are playing this Sveshnikov variation with black and with significant success. So it's not just simple assessment. It's a deeper evaluation of the basic position with weaknesses. An interesting game by Nimzowitsch against Mitchell that was played in 1926 reveals interesting aspects of his strategy and his approach to building an attack. Actually, that's very instructive, and I would recommend you to closely follow this game. Well, I have a few remarks and few corrections about this game, however. Okay, knight f3, d5, Nimzowitsch is white, b3, knight f6. Again, we are not going to touch the opening part of this. It's already opening. Bishop b2, c5, e3, e6, knight e5, knight b2, d7, bishop to b5. Now, this is a very interesting move. What is white doing here? White tries to increase pressure on the long diagonal, on a1 h8 diagonal, increase pressure on the dark squares. Knight on d7 is the one piece that controls dark squares. At this point, black tried to exchange white's knight on e5. So white goes bishop b5 because this light square bishop cannot participate in a pressure on a dark diagonal. So that's why white eliminates one of the black's pieces. They may participate in controlling dark squares. So bishop b5 is a good move. Black played a6, bishop takes d7, and now knight takes d7. Oh, black didn't want to play bishop takes d7 because knight is very well placed comfortably on e5, and then what white would do is castle, go f4, d3, knight d2, and knight f3. So black chose to take with the knight, which is understandable. And after knight takes back to d7, knight takes to d7, bishop takes to d7, white castled, and black played in this position f6. Now I don't like this move. It's a bad move. Now in today's Nimzowitsch played this game very well. He attacked very well and he performed very well. However, black's defense was on a low level. Black should have never played f6 since it's a weak move, and what black should have done, they should have seriously considered to play counterattack. For instance, they could have considered playing queen c7. But black is anxious to play f6 to block white's diagonal, white's bishop on b2. Queen c7, for example, if white goes d3, maybe even bishop d6, attack on h2, and white has to do something like f4, and then maybe even castling alongside. And now what is going to happen if white plays bishop takes g7? Then black can go rook g8, and after bishop f6, rook e8. And later on they may go e5 or bishop e6, try to put pressure on g2 pawn. On top of everything, in this position after bishop d6, and when white played f4, even earlier. So now black can consider playing e5 always. This is a lot more active way of playing. And Nimzowitsch says in this position that move f6 is an admission of weakness of the long diagonal. c4 was played, d takes c, b takes c, and bishop to d6. Now, very strong move by white, queen h5 check. Now white wants black to play g6, after which the diagonal a1 h8 diagonal is going to be weak. Black played g6, and I think it's another mistake. I think correct move here is king to e7, disabling the bishop on b2. But as I said, the ways of defense was not by black was not sophisticated enough, and that's why they quickly fell apart. Nimzowitsch does not even mention an opportunity for black to play king e7, and it's a really good move. Now if white goes knight c3, maybe queen to e8, and then maybe queen to g6, followed by bishop c6, and black has reasonably comfortable game. But after g6, queen h6, now there is a threat, direct threat of queen g7, and after bishop f8, queen h3. Here, if black plays e5, then white would go queen g3 followed by f4, and you see the white's bishop on b2 becomes very powerful piece, and that's why black should never have played g6. What happened after queen h3 is black played bishop to e7, knight c3, and black castled, and white played a4. a4 is a good move. Nimzowitsch gives exclamation mark, and I agree with him because it eliminates any kind of a counterplay connected with b5. Bishop d6, f4, queen to e7, and e4. It's a very strong position for white, and it was very well performed further in the game. After e4, in this position, black's game is real bad. Bishop to c6 and g4. Now, white's next move is f5. In my opinion, it's totally suicidal. What black's move is f5, and it's totally suicidal. Opening this diagonal, a1 h8 diagonal for the light square bishop, is gonna end up real bad. And after correct defense in this position would have been rook f7, maybe later rook f8, maybe queen c7 and bishop e7, and wait for white to break through without making any more weaknesses on their own, but definitely not voluntarily opening the diagonal. G takes f, e takes f, and here white played e5. e5 is an interesting move that it looks like counterintuitive. Why would white play e5 when they want this diagonal to be open and a1 h8? But that's concrete. There is a concrete reason for it. After e5, bishop has to move to c7, and now knight to d5. You see, that's why. Because now queen is hanging, knight f6 is coming, and also black cannot stop white from advancing the e6 pawn. Bishop takes d5, c takes d, queen d7 was played, and now after queen d7, e6, and black resigned in this position because after queen takes d5, queen h6, there is no good way to stop queen g7 mate. So black resigned, since they cannot take the d5 pawn and they cannot ignore it either. On queen h6, if they have to go probably, queen e7 is the bad move, but then after queen c3 there is no defense to queen h8 mate. Diagonal worked perfectly for white, and it was very well played game by white, but I have to admit very poorly defended by black. Now, let's compare this plan to some ideas that we can have in our modern understanding of this kind of pressure on a big diagonal. There are several openings that can be played by white or by black. And if one side wants to open this big diagonal, the other side should clearly try to keep it blocked. Let me show a couple of examples. For example, white plays f4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6. If in this position white goes b3, black goes bishop e7, white goes bishop b2. If black goes c5 and white gives bishop b5 check, never interpose the knight. Interpose the bishop. It's like a very similar to what happened in the other game, except after exchange now you're going to have another piece, minor piece, which is knight on d7, that will control e5 square, that will have anything to do with white's pressure on big diagonal. Or maybe you should go castle first. Now white does not have comfortable way to exchange their light square bishop, so they have to go bishop e2. Now you can go c5, and if white castles, black can always contest this knight on e5 by maybe taking, and if pawn takes, going knight d7, and later on playing f6. That's one way to play. Now there is a similar idea. Let's take some opening like Nimzowitsch defense. But here, after bishop b4, like queen c2, one of the most popular variations, one of the options for black is to go b6, e3. We can get it through different move orders, this position. But basically position becomes like this. Now d6, bishop e2, knight e4, queen c2, f5, castle, knight to d7. You see the similarity. Now here is the same thing. Black has the strong diagonal, and in some cases they may perform very strong attack on the king side. So correct way for white to play probably knight e1 followed by f3 and knight d3. It's going to be very difficult for black to follow up with their plan. So it's the sophisticated way to protect, to play against attack on this big diagonal. Or let's take another interesting variation, and we can see what can happen if white is careless against the same type of positions. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, and now knight f3, b6, bishop g5, bishop b7, e3, h6, bishop h4. Now in this position, or even so, black can play g5 after bishop g3, knight to e4, and after queen c2, d6, a3, or even bishop d3, f5. Now here actually black couldn't have done d6 because of queen a4 check, so suppose knight on c3 is taken. I just want to show you one typical pattern how white can play against this strong outpost knight on e4 and seemingly powerful bishop on b7. One of the ways to counterattack before black develop the rest of the pieces to hit black in the center, d5. Now the knight on e4 is hanging, and knight d4 is very powerful threat with the idea of knight takes e6. For example, if e takes d, knight d4 may be very dangerous move. You see white is threatening knight e6, knight takes f5, and black's king is a little bit open. So we know now these ways to play against if your opponent puts knight on e4 and bishop on b7. That's the same position Nimzowitsch had in the game we just looked. He had only thing that he played for, he had the same structure that we just looked now. He had for white. He went knight f3, d5, b3, knight f6, bishop b2, e6, e3, and on c5, knight e5, or bishop b5 check. So the same ideas. The pattern is the same. We have to know. We cannot just let white, in this case, to exchange this bishop for the knight, just, and then have them establish superiority on the dark squares, because that's how attack developed. And Nimzowitsch had bishop and the knight against two bishops. And bishop and the knight, when you want to play on a certain squares, they can have combined power of playing on dark squares. And two bishops cannot be combined power. So one plays on light squares, the other plays on dark squares. So those are the dangers. And that's why Nimzowicz's opponent was not aware in 1920s of the sophisticated defenses, and he got quickly very bad position and lost game quickly. Biggest progress that was made in last 70 years since Nimzowicz's theory of strategical play is in the means we use to exploit some advantages or patterns, or if we say some kind of sophistication of achieving certain goals. Well, we have position here that Nimzowitsch evaluates as black's position appears defensible and black has no problem. That was the evaluation many years ago. In today's world, if you give to any good technical player, technically well-adjusted player, this position is absolutely and unconditionally won for white. Now, how can we win this position? Nimzowicz's assessment that black has defendable position because white has very hard time break through with e5 because black has all the pieces there, and going f5 will give black very nice square on e5, and well, based on that, it's very difficult to make progress. That's the assessment Nimzowitsch was made. In reality, of course, position is clearly lost for black. I think what white can do, can go queen f2. Actually, what move we make now, it won't make much difference. Would we know what plan we have to build? You must notice that f5 will almost always be bad for black since it opens black diagonal, and bishop is going to be very, very active on this diagonal. So what white should do, necessary moves, we have to go g4, g5, king h1, rook g1. Of course, we have to do it carefully, but that's the plan. Now, whether we make first move h3 or king h1, it will make little difference. We can put, what I would do here, if I played, I would go queen f2, and notice that black just has to play on their last two ranks, on 7th and 8th rank, and wait what white will do. What white will do. Queen f3, maybe g4 now, or maybe king h1 first. And well, suppose black goes king h8. Now we're gonna go g4, and if black stands and waits. Then we go rook g1. Eventually, we're gonna be ready to go g5, or maybe we even go rook g3 and bring another rook on g1. Once we go g5 and we have two bishops supported, attacking, both bishops attacking on a king side, and you have every piece in attack, and black has very hard time maneuvering on a back rank. So this is just matter of very short time when white will checkmate black's king. Well, if they go g5, for example, well, right now, I know we made too many moves for white. I don't think there's anything can be done at all for black. So when we go g5, it's going to end real quick. On f5, we're going to go g6, and you see finally the dark square bishop opened, and there is no possible defense here. And if f takes e, then queen h5, you see every piece is over the black's king, and black is gonna get mated real quick. So this position, the original position, was analyzed by Nimzowitsch as very defendable. In reality, is totally lost. But that's what the assessment was. Assessment was many years ago. But times changed, technique changed, understanding changes, and criteria and standards change. So that's why if you read about this position, that position is defendable. No, position is defendable for the next few moves. Is position defendable in general? Absolutely not. Queen f2, queen f3, support g4, move the king, go rook g1 and g5. It's absolutely lost. Now, suppose black tries to get some active defense. Suppose we go queen f2, rook e7, queen f3, rook e8. So suppose we started g4. Now they go knight d8. And they try to play bishop c6 and counterattack our e4 pawn. What I would recommend, not to put your king on this diagonal with the bishop. So maybe we should go h4, and after bishop c6, king h2, and then rook g1. You see, king is on different diagonal. So now, whatever black does, same plan is going to be absolutely decisive. Rook g1, we can go h5 and g5. There is no possible defense. On f5 going to be same, g6, and properly prepared attack will easily win for white. So it's not how black defends this position. If white plays, there are some whole bunch of different kinds of positions which are should be evaluated as winning for one side. So if white plays this position correctly, it does not matter how black plays. So if black plays well, they can last a little longer, but it absolutely will not change the fate of the game. So this position is lost, and that's how it has to be regarded. And Nimzowicz's evaluation is absolutely wrong in this case. Well, it's not because it's his opinion against mine. It's not at all. It's times changed and a lot been done in a development of chess for last 75 years, and this is one of these good examples. In the book, Nimzowitsch explains basic aspects and general principles of the pawn structure, and he explains it very, very well. Well, this is one of the positions that's given in the book where he says that black's b5 move is well met by white uh, by white's positional reply knight d5. Well, and I agree with him. He says after knight takes d5, otherwise white will probably play knight takes e7 check, having two bishops and significant advantage. Knight takes d5, e takes d, and now he says after knight takes d7, d4, bishop takes d4 with a comfortable advantage for white. Well, I agree with advantage for white. I agree white is better. And the reason why, because pawns on a6 and b5, if pieces start getting exchanged, if we just took some pieces off the board, they will be a weakness, because first of all they are on a light square, and white in the future may stop them and become, since both sides has light square bishop, those pawns may be weak in future. Also, there is, if white does not exchange queens and if bishops are exchanged, which seems like that's something black should do, bishop g5 will not do anything because of f4, and if black exchanges bishop f6, since bishop on d4 is very powerful, then in the future queen may go to a5 and create some problems to black's pawns. Well, I agree with Nimzowitsch in everything he said. Here is what I want to add to this. First of all, no experience or no strong player in today's world will play here for black b5. So why would black play b5 in such position? b5 is, it seems like it's an attacking move, preparation for attack. But there are principles that are not mentioned by Nimzowitsch. Attack that starts with move b5 cannot be successful, even if white does not play move like knight d5 right away. It cannot be successful because you can see that white has significant space advantage. Also, it's clear that black's pieces are not aiming towards white's king. So in this position, even if white played g4 and h4 and continued with counterattack, which was another option, which may be even more logical option than the knight d5 move, white would have had upper hand in this game. So knight d5 is positional solution, and g4 I like as well. So in general is not the aggressive move b5 as Nimzowitsch mentions. That's not an aggressive move. That's irrational move. That's a mistake. What should black do? Black already does not have very good position here. Maybe they should play like knight takes d4 and then bishop e6, and then try to play knight d7 and bishop f6, which is a passive play, a passive plan. I understand that. But on the other hand, black does not have an active plan in this position. Their position is passive. They should have thought about activity when they chose the opening. This is poorly played opening, and position they got is already not so good, and that's why this position is bad. And so obviously player that got to this position, so it was not such a great player. So we shouldn't be surprised if we see him play b5. That's just a logical continuation of black's play. So we should know that you should not start attack, You should not start aggression when your pieces are not active enough and you have no pieces aiming on your opponent's king and you have space disadvantage. Let me show you one very interesting example that is in a way similar to this. In a way similar to this, for well, e4, e5. Now this is Petrov defense. This is one of the variations I recommend to play for white. Knight c3, knight takes c3, d takes c, and we're not going to discuss the opening aspects of this game. Bishop e7, bishop e3, castle, queen d2, knight c6, white castled, black plays bishop e6, king b1, and suppose here black starts playing a5 and starts going for attack a5, b5, and b4. a5, b5, a4 tries this kind of a pawn storm on the queen side. Now I can tell you this cannot be successful. Well, actually a5, b5, or maybe a6, b5 supporting b pawn. The reason is this. First of all, after a6, if simply white plays knight d4, and after knight takes d4, c takes d, you see that we're gonna go d5 next move, and there will be no pieces attacking white's king. Black does not have firepower, so white will have some space advantage. Secondly, well, if black plays a6, we will go, suppose h3, b5, g4. How should black continue now attacking? Suppose rook b8. We should see if there is any prospect in this attack. So we could go, I don't know, maybe rook g1, continuing h4, g5. Just look, if black goes b4, we go c4. There is no way black can activate its pieces attacking on the queen side. Something like bishop f6 will be met by g5, and bishop cannot stay on that diagonal anymore. And black does not have an active place. So the correct plan in the position that we had here would be that black should try to exchange some pieces and to neutralize a slight space advantage that white has. Every attack in chess that starts attack, it has to be well justified, and attack should never depend on your mood that if you need to win a game, if you are an aggressive player, but you have to prepare the attack. You have to have some kind of grounds for attack. For example, e4. Let's look at, just give you some ideas when there is a good grounds for attack and when there isn't. Knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, just a dragon variation. Obviously, we are not going to discuss the theory of it, but bishop e3, bishop g7, f3, and one knight c6, queen d2, castle, bishop c4, and bishop d7, white castles, black goes rook c8, and bishop b3. Now, why did white castle long side? Because it's very important. Now, you see this pawn structure. You see black's pawn on g6 is the key. That's the answer. Why white castled queen side. Now, this attack would not have been as successful for white if the bishop was on e7 and pawn on g7. Let me explain why. Because when we go here, g4, followed by h4, suppose just I make random move just to illustrate what I to show my point. And now h5. You see, we immediately got the initiated contact with the g6 pawn, which guarantees us opening of the h file. So whether black takes or white takes, either way the h file is going to be open, and white has good attacking chances. Now we're going to change it a little bit. So we're going to go and look at this pawn structure. In this position, it's very, very difficult for white to open files. Well, now after g5, knight e8, and we go h5, is trying to attack the position. Black is going to have counterattack too. And now, even if we go g6, now it's still difficult to open position, because after h6, g takes f, rook takes f7. Yes, white did open the g file, but black's pieces are alive on a king side, which would have been completely different picture if pawn structure was different. With this pawn structure, however, once we take hg and black takes back, we see that black's pieces cannot help white's king. White can double or maybe even triple on h file. This is one way of trying to checkmate black's king, or go bishop h6, exchanging dark square bishops and then getting with the queen on h6. So that's the base. You have to have a base for attack. Another very interesting point I want to make. Well, now we're going to get completely different opening. Opening that has not Sicilian and not the one we just saw from Nimzowicz's example. Let's look at the Queen's Gambit. Regular Queen's Gambit position. Bishop g5, bishop e7, knight f3, castle, e3, knight d7, queen c2, rook e8, c takes d, e takes d, bishop d3. Now, let's talk about this position. Black goes c6, and I would castle here short. Well, nothing actually very interesting about it, and it comes the regular positional play after knight f8, and then we will try to play rook b1 and b4. Now, what this has to do with attack? Let me explain something. Suppose instead of c6 here, black played h6, bishop h4, and now c6. Okay, here I would castle the queen side. Let me show you why. It's just because the h6 pawn, black's pawn is on h6. This is very valid point, and I want you to understand it clearly. Now, when normally in chess, and I mentioned it before, in the huge majority of positions, once you have castled on the opposite sides of the board, most of the time attack will be performed against kings. Well, we're going to start to attack on a king side, and black will start to attack on a queen side. So our attack with the pawn structure, with the pawn on h7 and bishop on g5, is not necessarily more effective than black's pawn storm b5, a5, b4, a4. However, it's different picture when the pawn is on h6, because suppose now black goes knight f8, we go h3, and black goes, I don't know, maybe bishop e6, preparing the b5 and a5 attacks, since maybe b5 immediately can be met with knight a5 and difficult to protect the c6 pawn. So after bishop e6 we go g4, b5 and g5. You see right away white initiates contact with the pawn structure, with the black's pawn structure on the king side, which will lead to opening files. So with the pawn on h7, white should need maybe 7-8 moves before they come close to opening files. Here, right away in 2 moves, we may be opening files immediately. And this is very important. Now, maybe not g5 right away, because black may go knight d7 and attack, and white's bishop is pinned. Actually, even this is consideration. G takes h, bishop takes h4, h takes g. Now, whether it's going to be, whether white's piece sacrifice is going to be successful or not, that's not something we want to discuss. I want to attract your attention on the fact that white has an opportunity to open black's position, to initiate contact with black's pawn guards, black's king's pawn guards. We see the pawns guarding the king. So again, we go to the key position here. And my point I want to make here, that in this position, I would rather castle rook maybe on f8. I castle short. If h6 and bishop h4 was played before, then I would clearly castle long and would go. It's not, well, if I castle long now, it's not a gamble whether who is going to attack who. Of course, if you are much stronger than your opponent, your attack is going to be successful. You're going to succeed no matter what position it is. But it's any gamble and any aggressiveness. You can be aggressive in chess always, but it has to be well justified. Aggressive, it's not, you are not playing in casino. You are not making, it's not dice. Chess is very logical game. Anything you do has to be well calculated and well justified. And again, with a pawn on h6, bishop on h4, castling long is well justified. One of the biggest chapters in positional play, and also in Nimzowicz's book, is a pawn structure, and he talks about pawn structure, about doubled pawns, and restraint of the double pawns. We can put it all together and call it basic aspects of the pawn structure. Okay, we know as a general answer, the double pawns are not good. But let's see, it's not always like this. We may have one example of double pawns. For example, e4, c6, d4, d5, ed, cd, bishop d3, knight c6, c3, knight f6, bishop f4, bishop g4, and now we can go queen b3. But suppose, in this position, queen b3 and black goes queen b6. You see now, if white move here, white can take black's queen and create the double pawns for black. And it is white's move in this position. But let's for a second assume that It's a black's move here. So black can take and create double pawns for white. There is no general answer that double pawns are not good. Interestingly enough, I'm going to show you now that double pawns for white in this position are very good, and double pawns for black in this position are very bad. And the reason why, when we talk about double pawns, what can possibly be a strength in the double pawns? Why is this position good for white? For several reasons. You see, white rook has an open A file to operate on, and also black can push the B4 pawn farther down, dislodge the black's knight on C6, and that will increase the weakness of black's A pawn. So this, and white can do that without weakening its own pawn structure. Now, for example, suppose this pawn wasn't on b3 but was on a2. Then if we go b4 and b5, that's not good at all, because black will play knight a5, and let's see what black got. Black got the weak square. White has the weak square on c4. White does not have the open A file for rook, and that's just simply a bad idea. With a pawn on b3, when we go b4 and b5, it's completely different picture. It's very good for white. And now let's see the other side of it. Black takes, black gets double pawns. Now you see that b pawn cannot move, mobility is not there, and c7 pawn also can be in some cases a target. And most importantly, white can play now knight a3 and place the knight on b5. Thanks to black's double b pawn, they will never be able to chase this knight away with the pawn. So when we talk about double pawns, there is no general answer whether they're good or bad. Maybe most of the time it's not very good, but there are a lot of positions when double pawns are good. Now, let me show you some other aspects of double pawns and how to play against them and how to play with them. Now, e4, e5. Actually, I can clearly show you the ways how to play with double pawns based on examples that I worked on. So, well, there's a bishop c4. Suppose d6, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, white castles and black castles. White takes on c6 and b takes c. Here, black has double pawns. Is this so bad for black? No, it is not. Because you see pawns are on c7, c6, and d6. It's kind of chain of the pawns, and without any of these pawns, this chain could have been a lot weaker. Now let's talk. If there was no pawn on c7, then d6 pawn can be weak and can be put pressure on. If pawn was not on c6, then white has good outpost on d5, and also those pawns don't move at all. So this is not such a bad pawn structure for black. However, black's problem is a little bit space disadvantage. Move for white is bishop f4. Here's what white wants to do. We want to play e5, and if, for example, pawns get exchanged, now you see that black has a terrible pawn structure, because c7 pawn is weak, c6 pawn is weak, and a7 may be weak later too. Now they are totally ruined. That's what they called pawn islands. There is such expression, pawn islands. White has two pawn islands. One is a2, b2, c2 pawns. That means connected pawns, and the other h2, g2, and f2. Black has four pawn islands because a7 is one, c7 is the other one, and c6 is the third one, and h, g, and f pawns fourth one. Why I am saying the c7 and c6 pawns are separate islands? Because they are not connected. They are not connected because they cannot. Island, we talk about, it's a number of pawns that cannot protect each other. c7 pawn cannot protect c6 pawn, and vice versa. So this position is really bad, and a lot of times, well, actually, I would say maybe a huge majority of the times, double pawns are weak without, if they are not part of the chain. Now, let me show you some other disadvantages of double pawns. Now I can show you it's very interesting aspect of a positional play. When, well, there is a Sicilian defense, one of my pet variations and suggestions, bishop b5, and there is a big positional mistake for black, e6, bishop takes c6, b takes c, d3, d5. Now this position for black is lost. It's not bad. It's not like white has an advantage. It's just simply lost for black. And why is it lost? Because of their double pawns, c6 and c5. Are we going to win these pawns? Why? Are they weaknesses? No, they are not. And if we had a chance to win c5 pawn, we wouldn't do that. The reason why those pawns are so bad is because white plays e5, knight e7, then we castle, black castles, we go knight to a4, queen to a5. Now we're attacking c5 pawn, but we don't really want to take this pawn. And now we go c4. Here is very interesting point I need to make. We play c4, and you see we froze c5 and c6 pawns. We froze them, which means that those pawns will never be able to move. And why is it so important? Black has a lot of different other pawns that they can move. It's important because of we have pawn on e5 and pawn on c4. If you take a very close look, they completely kill black's light square bishop. Now position is closed. Black has two bad bishops and a especially terrible bishop on c8, which will never see the light of day. Later on we're going to play b3, and on rook d8 we may even exchange queens. It's important do not rush to win the c5 pawn. c5 pawn does does not do anything good for black. F- uh, let's let's look at this position. Well, I mentioned that this position is lost for black, and it is absolutely lost. Black would have been much better off not having one of the c pawns. If they didn't have one of the c pawns, they're much better off because they can play maybe d takes c, d takes c5, and take the bishop out. But you see, bishop on c8 is doomed, will never be developed, and strategically, after white plays b3, white can go exchange queens and take bishop a3, bishop takes c5 this pawn, or white can go queen e2, queen f2, queen h4, attack on a king side. Black is totally helpless. This is good way to play against double pawns. Now let's see, I'm going to show you some examples where where double pawns are strength. So you never look at the double pawns and look in a dictionary, in a chess kind of dictionary, whether it's good or bad, because dictionary will give you a wrong answer, because any answer that will be given to you, whether double pawns are good or bad, any answer will be wrong. Everything depends on position. Now let's look at interesting position. It's in two knights defense. One, this is the opening that I recommend for white. Knight takes d4, bishop d7, bishop takes c6, bc, castle, bishop c5, f3, knight g5, f4, knight e4, bishop e3, and now bishop b6. Now let's talk about this position. White should play knight d2 on knight c3. They have to develop, and they have to exchange the knight on e4. Since it's very powerful knight, and we have knight on b1 that is not developed. The correct move here is knight to c3. And if black castled in this position, then correct move would be knight to d2. It's all based strictly on the pawn structure. We need double pawns in this position because when black castles, we should be able to play queen d2, rook e1, and when black goes c5, then we go knight e2, and you see how difficult for black to keep moving these central pawns. Our double pawns on c3 and c2, they are stoppers for black pawns, and we want to do is knight g3 and f5, slowly develop our attack on the king side. Now that's clearly understandable. Now let's see what would have happened if white played knight d2. Now this is a big mistake, because black can play knight takes d2, queen takes d2, and c5. Now after knight e2, black goes d4. You see, there is no white pawn on c3, so black goes d4. Bishop has to go on f2, now bishop c6. All of a sudden, white has terrible position. Right now, black is threatening to checkmate white. After queen d5, it's all over. There is no protection to g2 pawn, but of course white can find a way to protect it. But then queen goes to d5, black castles long, and black has wonderful position. They, because of the pawn structure, because they advanced their central pawns. On the other hand, suppose black does not play bishop b6 or black castles. Now we don't need double pawns. Now we can go knight d2, because after knight takes d2, queen takes d2, when black is ready to advance the pawn, it's our move, and we stop black from playing c5. And further on, using these double pawns, those are bad double pawns, c7 and c6, and the reason why, not because they are weak, no, because we put the piece on c5, and it cannot be, black cannot chase this knight away, and later on we support this knight and go b4, and this pawn, whole black's queen side pawns are blocked, and they're totally paralyzed. So it's important. When do we need the double pawn? You need to stop black from moving their pawn center. So in the case when black plays bishop e6, bishop b6, we play knight to c3, and now c5 is not as good, because now we can simply go knight to b3, and after knight takes c3, b takes c. You see, those pawns are not moving. If c4 moves, we go knight d4 back, or maybe even knight c5, followed by queen d4. Pawns are solid blocked. So we go knight c3, and if bishop on b6, knight takes c3, bc, c5, we still can go knight b3, or maybe even knight e2. Actually, the better move is knight b3, and let me explain why. On knight e2, black may be able to play bishop b5 and exchange this knight later on for bishop, which normally is not a good piece. So I would go after c5 knight b3, forcing c4, and now I would go maybe even knight d4, and after c5 knight e2. You see, those pawns are not going to move anymore. They are solid blocked. We have pawn on c3, knight on e2, bishop on e3, queen on d1, four pieces that control movement of d pawn. So either that, or after move c4, you could have gone knight c5 right away. They are both equally good. It's important to block black's pawn movement. So, and you see, this is interesting position actually. Both sides have double pawns, and white's double on the same file too. And white's double pawns make much more sense than black's. And again, once if black castles here, now we don't need double pawns, because we make sure that after bishop b6, we're not going to let black play c5, and we're going to go knight b3, or maybe even b4. But knight b3 and c5 will never be in the picture. These are very, very important aspects about double pawns. However, if we talk about the end games, let's talk about double pawns in end games. I would say about 85 to 90% of the positions with double pawns are not good in the end game, because end game has a lot less positional play and maneuvering than the middle game would. So we are talking about those principles that double pawns may be very useful for the side that has them in certain positions in middle games, and there may be maybe